Michael Sorsdahl. I'm here to talk a little bit about the new casebook from CCPA. It is entitled Ethics in a Canadian Counselling and Psychotherapy Context. As one of the co-editors, myself, Roberta Borgen and Bill Borgen, we're all working together in order to kind of create this new updated version of the ethics case study. A book that has already been out by previous editions and in previous versions and approaches. In order to come up with our approach and sort of kind of give you all an idea about sort of the new way that we looked at trying to create this textbook, is how we kind of drew from all of you to kind of pull the CCPA membership specifically to trying to understand what it is that people were looking for. So we put out a survey, drew from the information from people about what they liked, what they didn't like about the previous editions, what they were looking for in an ethics casebook, to really make it helpful for not just counselor educators that teach ethics, but also for supervisors and just regular counselors that are just working in the field and really wanting to understand how to build their ethical practice. So we received a lot of information which really kind of formed the ideas and approach that we created to structure the book. The next thing that we kind of did after that was we drew out and pulled from CCP membership and from external sources for sort of contributors. Contributors as authors to textbook chapters, whether they were or contributors to other components of the textbook that I'll talk about through the structure of the book, that we would draw in information from people and sort of their contributions. So just to talk quickly about the sort of the structure of the book itself. We kind of formed it into 4 different sections. So I'll talk about each section and then how they work together and how people can use them. So the first section that we created is entitled Contextualizing Ethical Practice for Today's Counselors and Therapists. So what that includes are 3 chapters, basically. And the 3 chapters focus on, first, the historical evolution of ethical practice within CCPA, of course, but sort of the evolution, how ethics evolved, how counseling ethics grew, how it's evolved over time to become what it is today, knowing that our ethical codes and standards of practice were just most recently released for our most recent versions. So just knowing that. Then we moved into another chapter that really kind of focused on the legal and regulatory implications, which is an important component in counseling practice, and ensuring that we combine and find the intersectionalities between legal and regulatory implications. And then we did a really focused overview around ethical decision-making models that are presented in the Code of Ethics. There's 4 of them, and we wanted to really kind of explore, expand, and talk about how each of these can be utilized in connection with the Code of Ethics and standards of practice and utilized in practice. And so those are the kind of the first sections that we talked about. The next section of the book is really focused more and really in alignment with the Code of Ethics and standards of practice. And so what we did is we used basically the major headings and drew chapters speaking to each of those major headings. So as an example, professional responsibility, there's a chapter on, or counseling therapy responsibilities, assessment and evaluation, professional research and knowledge translation, even clinical supervision services or consultation services each have their own chapters, moving into counselor therapist education and training. And of course, incorporating elements of the use of electronics and other technologies as its own chapter, and a chapter on Indigenous peoples, communities, and context. So really trying to pull out what the ethical codes and standards of practice are trying to bring in, and speaking to each of those. And when we spoke into those chapters, what we did was we looked for sort of an overview, an explanation of what's going on in those areas and those fields of counseling and psychotherapy. But then we also looked at kind of what are the recommended practices and ways to best approach things from that perspective. And then we also included pitfalls, where people get into trouble, or challenges, or things to consider when you're trying to overcome those complicated ethical dilemmas or situations that people might come up against focused in those areas. So from there, we kind of pulled those chapters together. Spattered throughout all of those kind of chapters, we have case studies. And so we have up to, minimum of 2, up to like 4 or 5 case studies that are actually embedded throughout those chapters that allow the reader to go in, read about this case study, and then kind of work through different ethical decision-making models, how they would deal with that ethical situation. So very similar to previous renditions of the casebook, we give you cases to kind of go through. Connected to that piece, we also then have chapter 3, which is more complex ethical case studies. So that just gives you more complex ethical case studies that are more encompassing, possibly more involved, just sort of trying to see how ethical decision-making is not always simple, specifically some cases can be really complex and really intersections. So really understanding how to pull that apart. So we kind of give that section 3 chapters a couple, a whole bunch of case studies that you can kind of move through on those. What we've done that's different than in a lot of other renditions of this case study book is what we do in section 4. So what we did is we put out the case studies that we created and developed and drew from people who recommended these case studies, because we did a call for case studies from the CCPA membership. We pulled together these case studies, we placed them where we thought they were most connected, and then we had other members of the CCPA who were contributing to actually go through and come up with a solution to that case study, how they would deal with it using a specific model, right? The ethical decision-making model. So we have at least 2 different ethical decision-making models per case study that is found throughout section 3. So every case study in section 2, in section 2, every case study in section 2 of all those chapters that are connected to the CCPA headings, the Code of Ethics and Standards of Practice headings, have solutions that are provided. Those solutions were reviewed by the Ethics Complaints Committee just to make sure that we were on the same page of what was resulted, and some things were shifted and adjusted to make sure that what we were proposing are both ethical but also different, because different answers and different solutions come up based on different ways and different models. And so finding a way to maneuver and understand how to use ethical codes, standards of practice, decision-making models becomes a really focused component of this case study book. And so we give you a bunch of solutions throughout section 4 to those case studies in section 2. There are no solutions for section 3, case studies, the more complex ones. That's really designed for kind of just maneuver through those and kind of understand them, and try to pull into practice all the stuff and the learning that you would gain through the textbook and of course from your own experience. So that's kind of the structure and overall view of how this textbook is used. We really wanted to make this book be useful not just to the counselor educators that are teaching ethics books or ethics courses that are going to be able to combine those, but to be really useful for those that are supervisors trying to help supervise other counselors or even students, but to kind of really utilize these in different ways to kind of help expand and explore ethical decisions, which becomes a really huge cornerstone of ethical practice within counseling and psychotherapy. But also just the regular practitioner, who this book would also be really useful for, because it takes you through recommended practices, ways to work through it, how other counselors in the field have managed or think they would manage complex situations or ethical situations or dilemmas that they would come up against. So that's kind of the structure and overall view of how the book works. We've drawn from obviously the historical elements of the previous books and kind of pulled from those, but also really wanted to give a different approach that came from the suggestions and ideas and desires from the CCPA membership that we gained. So I really hope that you all will enjoy this book, that it becomes useful, and it's a growth and iterative version that will kind of grow from there, and in the next version that we can even make it even better. So I really appreciate your time listening to this presentation about it, and hopefully if there's any questions that we'll be able to answer those as you move forward.